In this movie, I'll be showing you how to format text in Dreamweaver. On the left, you see the code view, and you'll see a single line of text in the body, how now brown cow, and why.
I don't know.
You'll see that line of type also in design view. And so code has no style. It's just absolutely plain text. But when you look at the design view, this is being styled. What is determining the styles here? Well, nothing I've done in the code. This isn't even wrapped in a paragraph element or a heading element. This is just being defined by what? Well, it's being defined by browser defaults. And so in all of the browsers we have, there are defaults set, whether you've changed them or not. Default typically are going to be Times Roman, for instance, maybe Helvetica for a sans serif font. So what you're seeing displayed here is just a typical browser default font. Now, it is important that text be wrapped in a type element. So there are different ways to do that, and that's a big part of what this movie is going to show you how to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is just drag over this line of text in here, and I'm just going to cut that. Now there's different ways to do it. I typically do it with a keystroke, Command X. You can also go to the Edit menu. You can also right-click on the piece of type itself and choose that from the menu that drops. It doesn't really matter, whatever you prefer. Okay, then I'm going to refresh my view by clicking on this button here, and you'll see I've taken the content out of the code, and therefore the design view is now empty. So often the best way to get text into a layout is by copying and pasting. And so if I have a large block of type, that's normally going to come from, say, a Word document of some kind. Well, it's completely acceptable just to go to that Word document, copy the text you want, and then click either in the code view or the design view and paste the type in. And so I just clicked in design view. I'm now going to go Command V to paste it. And there is that line of type. And you'll see we got right back to where we were before. Here's the content in the code, but again, it's not wrapped in a paragraph element or a heading element. So you can remedy that pretty simply in design view, believe it or not. If I just make sure my cursor is right after that question mark, and then I hit the return key, you'll see a couple of things happen. That first of all, it wrapped this type over here in a P element, and so that was enough to tell Dreamweaver that, okay, this is type, it should be wrapped in a type element. So it chose paragraph because that's the most common. Now if I hit return again, you'll see that it will add another line in design view, but look what happened over here in code view. See, this is where Dreamweaver can really help you out with your code writing.
Thank you.
It allows you to work in design view if you prefer, and it will generate a lot of the code. But you do need to pay attention to what's happening in the code to make sure that Dreamweaver did what it should do. So now if I just very simply, you'll see the type in here is kind of gobbledygook. It stands for a no break space, but what that means is it's just an empty place waiting for you to put text into. And so I'm just going to paste some type in there, the same type we pasted already, and you'll see what happens. It's immediately reflected over here in design view, and there it is over there. And so that's a simple way to format type. Now, you may not want this to be paragraph text, so there's different ways you can change it and create other pieces of type inside of different elements. To change this one, I'm just going to drag over that first P, and I'm going to make this into a heading 3 element, an H3. So if you remember, H1 stands for heading 1, and that is the biggest type size that's available in the browser. And heading 2 is smaller, heading 3 is smaller still, etc. So let me get in that other H3 element, click refresh, and you'll see a couple of things happen. The type gets a little bit bigger than it was, but you'll also notice that it becomes bold. And again, that's a default set by the browser. Now you can control that and change it, and I'll show you one way to do that in just a little bit. But for right now, let's just go ahead. I'll show you a couple of more ways to format your text. So I'm going to go into the code view, hit return, paste that line of type again. And this time what I want to do, and I'll click the refresh button so it shows up here. So you'll see there's no P tag or H3 tag wrapped around this, so it sets it to the default, which actually is the same as what the P tag is at this point. So if I want to change this to, say, an H2 element, there's a couple of other ways I can do it. So I'm dragging across that, and I can drag across that either in Code View or Design View, and then come down here to the Properties window. Now the Properties window has two buttons, one for CSS and one for HTML. We want the HTML because we're generating HTML element here. So if I go down here to Format, right now it says none, but if I drop this menu, some of the menu will get chopped off at the bottom of your screen, but I can pull down here to Heading 2. Choose that, and you'll see that in the code it automatically wraps it in an H2. And then over here in Design View, you can see your type is bigger still, and it is still bold. Alright, so let me show you one more way to do this. So I'm just going to paste in that line of text again. I will mark it, this time in the code. And over here there is a button. And this button right here, about the fifth one up from the bottom, is a wrap tag button. So if I click on that, you see that it will give me this little wrap tag window, and I can scroll down to find whatever element I want to wrap this in. Or I can very simply just type the element that I want it to be. So I want this to be H1. So I'm going to type H1. It will show it to me here in the list. I'll hit the Enter key to say, yep, that's the one. And then I'll hit the Enter key again to apply it. Then clicking the refresh button shows up in the code over here. And obviously, once again, it is bigger again. It is still bold. Okay, so there's another method I didn't show you, and this is one I actually use quite often. You can just go in and type the tags right here in the code. Whatever you think is quickest and easiest at the time. So I got an extra space here. I'm just going to get rid of that. And okay, so now we have our content wrapped in elements that will allow us to apply styling to those elements. So again, everything you see here are kind of browser defaults, but I don't want to use the browser defaults, and most of the time you won't want to either. And so how do we style them? Well, if you come over here, and this is a good habit to get into, if you click in Design View and you make sure nothing is currently active, down here in the Properties window, you'll see a button called Page Properties. Now, if anything is marked, it's quite likely that button will not show up. So that's why I go through that preamble. So I'm going to click on that button, and brings up this window here, the Page Properties window. Now, we'll use this a lot in class. In fact, you've probably used it already by the time you're watching this video. But this is a way to generate CSS rules, which is what's going to be applying the style to our various elements, in this case type, in our web page. And so in this first tab here, where it says Appearance CSS, you'll see one of my choices. It's page font. And so this will apply a rule for the type, any type that is in the body, which, as you know, is pretty much the entire page as it shows in the browser window.
Totally, for sure.
If I go here, right now it just says default font, which we knew, and I drop this menu, this gives me a whole list of different fonts. Now, we'll talk about this in class, but very quickly, if you remember, the reason there is a comma-separated list here is that it's telling the browser, okay, this is the font I want. So if we look at this line, we'll say Cambria. Do you have Cambria inside your computer?
No way.
No. Well, then how about this one, Hoffler Text?
No way.
Nope, don't have that one either. Liberation Serif, perchance?
No way.
Nope. Oh boy. Well, now we're down to Times and Times New Roman.
No way.
And if you don't have those, what kind of a computer are you, quite honestly? And then lastly, just give me any serif font you do have. At this point, I'm desperate.
What?
And so that's why you give a list, because remember, fonts are not included in the file itself. Now, later in the semester, we'll get to web fonts where we can include the files, but we're not there yet. So we have to use what the computer will give us. And so I'm just going to choose, I'm going to be simple here, and I'm going to pull down to this one because I just want a nice basic sans serif. So Gotham, Helvetica Neue, Helvetica Arial, sans serif. So choose that. Now if I pull this window down and apply, you'll see that it changes all of the fonts. Whether they're a paragraph or a heading, it doesn't matter. It's just saying any type you find in the body, this is the style I want it to be.
Yes, dear.
Okay, so size. Well, we'll talk again a lot about this in class, but there's different ways of sizing your type. When you're learning, I think the easiest thing to do is just work in pixels, a very finite measurement system. It's not a relative measurement system, it's absolute. And then we'll move to the more relative measurement systems as we get through the semester. So I'm going to make this be, let's say, 16 pixel. So I just typed in 16px, which you can do, or you can type 16 and then change the menu right here. And just hit the tab key to move on. Now the color. Do I want the type to be a color? Oh, what the heck. Let's just choose something. Let me pull this up so you can see the whole window. And let's just, something in the orange family is striking my fancy right now.
Hey, you're cute.
There we go. Kind of a orange with a little bit of black in it. Hit the enter key and then click apply. And you'll see that it's more of an ochre, I guess, is now all the type is that color, and the size of the paragraph type is 16. And then everything is scaled up from there for the different headings. All right, so that's how you style the type basically for the whole page. Now, what if you want to be more specific? Later in the semester, I'll show you how to be incredibly specific. But in this case, we just want to make it more specific to our headings. And so to do that, I can go to the Headings tab over here. And you'll see it gives me the ability to style all the 6 different sizes of headings that are available to me. Now I can change the font if I want, or I can tell it to stay the same font. I can go here and I can apply, a styling to it, such as italic or oblique, or inherit whatever the parent element is, or I can keep it normal. If I don't do anything, it will just stick with its default, which is normal. If I go here, you can see that I can set the different weights. And so I don't always like my headings to be bold. So I'm just going to turn this off and make it be normal.
That's a problem to me.
And then if I click apply, you'll see that all the type becomes normal. And then the heading here, I'm not going to change the size, but let's just change the color anyway. And so let's go ahead and make heading 1 be red. And make heading 2 be blue. And then finally, let's make heading 3 be green. And then we can apply this, and you can see that we have very specifically styled for each one of those particular elements. Click OK. And then let's take a moment to just look at the CSS rules that this generated. So again, we'll have talked about this in class. There's a whole nother video on the basics of CSS. So if you don't know this stuff yet, you may want to go watch that video. But up here in the head of the page, here are the rules for the body. And the font family is Gotham, Helvetica Neue, etc. So we established that in the Page Properties window. Here's the size we defined and the color. And then it's saying, okay, but if you find an H1 or an H2 or H3 heading, make sure that the font weight is normal. So that's what took off the bold. If you find an H1 tag, then make the color this, an H2, etc., etc. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And the cascading relates in different ways, but this is primarily what it means. If there's a rule that comes after a previous rule, then that new rule takes precedence. So up here we said, make the color of the type be this. But down here, It says, no, for an H1, make it be this. So at this point, the browser will not apply this rule. It will apply this rule because it came second after that, and it always applies the most recent rule. Okay, so again, we'll cover this ad infinitum in class and in other videos, but I just wanted to give you a taste of that.
Yum.
So I think we're going to stop right here.
Thank God.
The next movie, I will talk about how to apply links to text and how to style those.